So this is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting for Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. Great to see everybody. I think this will be a relatively short meeting, just a few bits of business we can take care of and a bit of a conversation we can have that I think will just make our getting started with budget stuff in January just a bit more efficient. So let me read the agenda. I don't think it's very controversial. I won't share it on screen, but let me just read it and get that approved unless there are any changes that anybody has. So we'll start with liaison reports. If there are any things that people want to report in that they've heard about budget related or other things. And then current meeting items include budget background discussion. So I'll send it around after the meeting. I just got it together this afternoon, so I didn't get a chance to send it around, but a few slides to share about Prop 2.5 and kind of where we are in budget, kind of broader budget context and where the Sherborn budget looks like it might be landing and what that means for how tight a year it's likely to be. Thought then we could have a brief conversation about if people are happy continuing with Zoom meetings or if there'd be a preference for trying to do hybrid meetings where some or most of us could be in person. And then I think the technology's there so that, if members of the public wanted to dial in, or if some of us needed to do that, we could. So talk about that briefly. And then we have some minutes to approve, including the really long ones from the public hearing, and wanted to get that out of the way so we're not messing around with that when we get to budget meetings in January. So anybody have any changes to propose to that agenda? Then I would welcome a motion to approve the agenda as read, as posted.
So moved.
All right. Is there a second?
Second it.
Okay. And quick roll call. Nora.
Aye.
Just get myself set here. Okay. Nora. Wasim.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Mike F.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. Okay, so 7-0 on that. Great. And I should mention Mike Winters kindly agreed to take minutes because this was a meeting that hadn't been included on the minutes rotation that we talked about, I think, at the last meeting. So thank you, Mike, for taking that on tonight. All right, so jumping right in, on liaison reports, there are a couple that I know people want to do. One maybe to start with, because it is a big chunk of the budget, would be schools. So Paul, Mike, and I went to the Sherborn School Committee meeting and the Regional School Committee meeting, not the same night, different nights, when they had a presentation on the first version of their budgets. They're asking for pretty sizable increases, and I think some combination of Paul and Mike. I'm not sure who wants to talk about that, but maybe just a couple minutes on what sort of the tenor of that was and what those budgets look like. The first round proposed budgets.
Well, I know you had some notes on that. If you want to take the lead, and I'll fill in some gaps if there's any.
Sure, I'd be happy to, right?
Sure, great. Thanks, Paul.
There are actually two separate meetings we had. One was with the Sherborn Public School Committee, who had the budget for Pine Hill School, right? And net, their operating budget past one is a growth of 8.13%. And I think there's kind of like the booklet and packet's pretty nice. I think they had kind of some some of the highlights, I guess, is 87% of the operating budget is from payroll, kind of not unsurprising. And they had a set of, I think, 3 or 4 budget drivers that were additions, right? And I kind of looked at, like, if all those were taken out, right, then the budget growth would still be at about 6%, right? So I think there's kind of work to do with them to try to bring it back down to sort of be closer to a flat budget. So that was the Pine Hill School. And I think it's kind of like, from my perspective, I think it's a very thoughtful budget, and it's kind of kind of hard for me to sort of debate or say that, you know, some of the items that they wanted to increase. To me, it's hard to sort of judge how worthy or not worthy it is. I think for me, it's probably just giving them the overall feedback that the budget as it stands, is at just north of 8% is probably too much, given other things. We'll have to see where Dan summarizes things standing, if you will. And it's probably more for the school committee to sort of look at where they might be able to find savings. Um, the DS Regional School District was similar-ish, right? So that has both um, that kind of encompasses the middle school, the high school, and again, it's a very nice, thoughtful packet. Net, the Sherborn part of that budget would amount to about a 6% growth over last year's budget. So again, I think it's higher than what our recommendation was, and there's probably more work for them to do to see if there's a way to bring that down a bit. And that one's, I guess, like my understanding is it's a bit more challenging because we would need to work with the Dover folks, as like leadership folks as well, to see if they agree and kind of where kind of they stand. So I think overall, in general, I think the net, like the other sort of main thing that I understand is that there is one item that's not that will be reflected in later versions, which is retirements, if any. And the way that that kind of works is anyone who plans to retire, I think gives notice. I think like in like November timeframe, but they have until like March-ish to decide if they want to rescind that or not. So then, given that the budgets don't reflect any decrease from any plan like retirements, and my understanding is there are some, if you will, but it's hard to know at this point how many those might be. That's my overall kind of summary about the state of where we are.
All right, thanks. That's great. Mike, did you want to add and fill in any bits?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty consistent with what we heard and what we discussed afterwards. There's a lot of the budget, a lot of the increases are due to the salary and benefit increases that are there's not much you can really do about those things at this point. And as Paul said, there's a few items in both budgets that we can kind of take a closer look at and make some questions, but there also may be some natural decreases that occur between now and the spring. But it's a tough budget to rein in too much, and unfortunately, it's a huge dollar item in the town budget. But so it's while we might be able to raise some questions and do some digging, it's the most likely outcome is that it's just going to shine a light on the other budgets for the other departments, and they're going to have to really pare down as much as possible.
Yeah, thanks. Did you want to mention anything about the special ed stuff? Or I could talk about that too, but that was a big chunk of that was an important, not anything that can be controlled, but a decent chunk of the Pine Hill piece.
Yeah, I mean that's another, similar to the salary and the benefits, where there's special education placements out of town. Those costs have to be borne by the school system, and it's required by law. So those dollar items are things that we're, as Dan said, we're kind of stuck with them. So and it's completely outside of the control of the school. So another significant cost that there's very little that can be done about it.
And as a matter of just accounting, all of the special ed out of district placements, even for kids who are in middle school or high school, if they live in Sherborn, it gets attributed to the Sherborn budget, and that lands in the Pine Hill school budget, even if it's a middle school or high school kid who's who has an out of district placement. So that was that was great. And I think it's just important because there's a it's 60% of the budget and it's going up a lot, and that's going to create some pressure. I can say from past years that Paul alluded to this in the comment about retirements. The typical pattern is the first round of the budget has a bigger increase than where the budget ultimately lands, as retirements and other things come in, and as pressure from the towns comes with, hey, what about this? What about that? Paul and Mike and I are going to meet with Dawn Fattori, who's the business administrator, business manager for the school. So we're going to meet with her in January to talk through some of these issues. I am trying to set up a call with the chair and vice chair of Dover Warrant to kind of take their temperature on these issues and find out if they're going to be allies for us or not. Historically, it's often been or not. I think this year might be different. I think from conversations I've had with them, I think Dover is paying a little bit more attention to budgets and pressures. So I'm hopeful that they will be allies, but we'll see where that goes. Anybody with questions for Paul or Mike on school stuff? Again, we'll have plenty of time to talk. I mean, we'll have a whole meeting to talk about school stuff. So, the intent tonight is not to get into a debate about particular line items and, is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's really just trying to set the stage. And Paul and Mike did a great job of just saying, hey, we've got this huge driver in the budget that is looking to be a really big increase, and that's something that we're going to have to manage and respond to and deal with. So it's really at that kind of a level that I was hoping our discussion would go tonight. But if anybody has questions for Paul or Mike on or me on school stuff, just jump in, and if not, we can just keep rolling on.
Yeah, just procedurally, how does that work, Dan? If Dover doesn't vote for,
Well,
or Sherborn
yeah.
doesn't vote for, how does that work?
So it's a very interesting governance process. So we will have a meeting joint with us, Dover Warrant, and the school committees, when we will, just as we go through the other budgets, we'll talk about their budgets. We'll all have chances to ask questions. Dawn Fattori will do a broad overview of here's the budget. That will be a version that will be different than the one we looked at tonight, because they will already have incorporated changes and feedback. If Dover Warrant is on the same page we will have much more success in persuading the school committees to direct Dawn to trim the budget. If they're not on the same page, then on Pine Hill, well, that's really us and the Sherborn School Committee. On the region, if Dover's in the, we have no concerns about the budget, we have concerns about the budget, the regional school committee will hear that, and they will put together the budget that they want to present to town meeting, and town meeting will vote to either approve or not approve that budget. We could, say we just, aren't going to present that budget. We're going to present a budget with smaller numbers, but that would just be unprecedented. So, our real points of leverage are coming up with before that meeting, hoping that Dover Warrant's kind of on the same page and that we can think about, not trying to do anything that's going to undermine the high quality of education, but maybe there's some places where, things could be trimmed back. I've got some ideas in mind. I think Paul and Mike do as well, where, we'll pursue that with them, and will hopefully help, kind of constrain that a bit. I think, as Mike and Paul indicated, it's going to be constraining it a bit. It's not going to change it hugely, because the school committees would just say, we're not going for that. We're going to present, a version like this. And then it becomes a matter of the, what happens at Dover town meeting, what happens at our town meeting, and what are voters willing to approve. I mean, in general, people write, we all know this, it's a big reason why a lot of people move to Sherborn or Dover. You know, the schools are a big draw, and I think there would be pushback if, you know, there was really some kind of thing that, you know, people thought was really going to undermine the educational quality and opportunity. So that's kind of how it's going to play out. It's a weird governance structure. It's really different than dealing with an in-town budget where, you know, we have a bit more say so, select board has a bit more say so, you know, before it goes to town meeting. Anything else? Yeah, Penn.
So I just want to make sure I understood that I was clear in your clarification. If we don't like that budget, you made it sound like we would have, and I assume we would be advisory, or somebody else would have to present an alternate budget? Or could we just say, as our advisory to the town, advisory does not support
Well,
the proposed budget? Do we need to come up with an alternative, or can we just say we don't like it?
yeah, so I have to think through the exact process, but
Mhm.
you know, advisory, I mean, we will write up a report
Mhm.
just as we did that brief one for the special town meeting. We'll write up a report. You know, we will vote on the budget, you know, as a committee. And if the consensus of the committee is, you know, that budget should be smaller by X, whatever that is, we could certainly put that into our recommendation to the town that, you know, here's the budget that the school committee has presented. You know, we think it should be less by X, or we think this particular line, you know, that they've asked for this thing they don't need. You know, our recommendation would be that, you know, an amended version be approved. And then at town meeting, you know, somebody could move to amend the budget and so on. The thing that I'm not sure of on process is with town budgets, you know, if there's a town department, we ultimately advisory presents the budget to the town, and we could say, hey, Department Y, you asked for this, we're not writing that down, we're writing down a smaller number. And if you want a bigger number, get somebody to offer an amendment at town meeting, you know, proposing a larger number, and see if it passes. I'm less sure of exactly how that works with the school committees because of that complicated governance structure. And it's a good question. And if we get to a point where there's a lot of disagreement with their budget and our consensus is, you know, goes in a direction different than their budget, then we'll have to figure out exactly how to manage that. And I would have to consult with the town moderator, and we'd have to and Jeremy, who's probably knows these rules as well, and figure out exactly how that would play out. So we have some scope. I don't know, without having had those conversations, I don't know exactly, you know, where the end of that scope lies.
Okay, thanks.
What else? Okay, I know the other thing was capital budget's been doing stuff. I think Nora was going to say a little bit about that. Mike, if you want to jump in too.
And Mike, feel free to jump in too.
Yeah, if you want to jump in too, that'd be great. And again, just kind of big picture, where do things stand as kind of a setup for, you know, what we'll be talking about in detail in January and February.
Okay, so briefly, and just if I'm going into the weeds here, just cut me off. So we did meet, we met with Chief Zach Ward, who actually I have to say wrote a really nice on the cover letter, and then supplement it with the RFPs, if you want to call that, invoices, that, you know, proposal. And so they were basically, it was $59,000 for turnout gear for 12, and they can be retrofit. There are actually 45 volunteer 45 firefighters, but there are 12 main ones. They need to, because of different things with lithium batteries and whatnot, I'm going into the weeds, I'll get right back out. But they need another set of these turnout coats, pants, helmets, and boots. So we did approve that. And then the other thing that was interesting, and maybe Jeremy might want to, because last year it was raised, the capital budget for approval was raised from 10,000 to 25,000. So if it's under 25,000, there's, you know, it's interesting with DOR where that gets put, but there were electric vehicle fire equipment totaling $8,800, and then water supply valves totaling 7,000. So that was it for the fire department. And then we also met with DPW for a capital budget. And that was, I know in my head, it was a total of 1,075,000. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't, Michael, I think that's what it was, but 350,000 for the for a big dump truck snow vehicle that takes a couple of years to get in to position or to get receipt of. Then 75,000 for traffic slowing on Western Ave, and we don't have to get on the weeds on that, but made a interesting case for that. And then water, different things with the stormwater system for the EPA and whatnot, and public water supply for PFAS. So that is what was going on there. Anything else? Another 75 for something that was supplemental to some, I believe, ARPA funding. So that it all told about 1,075,000. And so that was approved by the Capital Budget Committee. We have fire department coming up. They were trying to get a hybrid vehicle. Chief Galvin did submit to me what their list of vehicles are. We can get into that later, what they have, but they are requesting another vehicle. It might have to be an all gas vehicle, which is or a hybrid. Mike, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that, I guess the way I thought the last couple of meetings have gone summarized it. I mean, there was the initial budget or that is being presented. It was a 4 million, I'm rounding here, $4 million capital spend compared to $2 million last year. So it's a $2 million increase in capital spend. Now, $1 million of that 4 million was the regional school systems that has now since been pushed out to next year, some HVAC stuff and other big capital projects. So now it's closer to 3 million again versus 2 million last year. So it's $1 million higher. And the two big items there are the Historical Society build out of the library basement for about 850,000, and then redoing Jameson Fields for 500,000. And so those are the two biggest items remaining, and that gets you kind of the $1 million increase year on year.
And
I'm just I'm shorthand summarizing here, but that's my.
Yep. That's great. That's a great segue. And then on the library, we are waiting, final numbers for what was approved, the 1 million versus up to 7 million. So what the town has already spent on the library, including what the interest charges are for taking out a bond and all that. There's some, in the next month, hopefully we'll have kind of the final numbers, but I think that's important to get to. So we're waiting that.
All right. Was the turf field at the regional schools pushed out to next year as well? Do you recall?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay.
Jeremy can probably speak to that better than I can, but I believe everything.
Yeah, okay.
Right. No, there's Jeremy.
Yeah, all of the regional capital was pushed out. They're not requesting any capital at this point.
Okay. And they had some small items that they're just going to cover from E&D.
Correct. And those, I believe those were existing projects. They had some small shortfalls for that they were going to cover with E&D, but they're not requesting any capital funds for regional schools.
Okay, great.
An open item for the Pine Hill Elementary School is a placeholder for a potential cooling system, which is currently under study, but there's no value currently available for that request.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
Just as a side note too, from the police department, one of their, someone on staff there got her hands into saying, well, let's see what I can get for grants and whatnot. And Jeremy, would you know off the top of your head, I just don't want to guess at the number, but it was significant, 6 figures for a lot of grants that they actually received for things like tasers, things like anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's actually a number, well, at least 2 capital requests that would have been before the town have been covered by grants that the police department have received for taser replacements and for body cameras. So, upward over, in the 3 figures numbers. And so, deferred from having to be funded locally, but we're on the capital plan originally, now paid for via grants. But yeah, really kudos to the staff at the fire department, the police department for tracking all those grants down,
What was the
and
approximate-
also Public Works for the roundabout, over $800,000 towards the roundabout in Maple and Washington.
Right, and when you said three figure, you mean like 300,000, right? Was that the number in my head? Like, what was the number for the police department? Was it when you
I
said?
think there was like a $100,000 one and another 50,000. They've gotten so many recently. I think they're close to 300,000 all told.
That's what I thought. Okay, I didn't want to, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Okay. So that's a really nice overview. And we will have time, in our coming budget review meetings to talk about these things in detail to get into the weeds that Nora spared us from tonight, because that'll be the right thing to do when we get there. But this, I think, provides a nice sense of kind of the order of magnitude of what's coming down the pike, and what we're going to be asked to be thinking about. Okay, any other liaison things that anybody has that they want to bring on in? Penn, yeah.
Yeah, a very quick one. I was contacted by the, is it Historical Commission? No, Historical District. And they were very concerned. They're trying hard to adhere to the budget being flat. The problem is their spending is fortunately, it's very modest, but it goes up. I mean, it'll be $300 one year and $1,500 another year and $100 a year after. So it's very, very variable. They want another sign. They got 4, they needed 5. And they're having a lot of trouble with the vendor. They sent me, so they paid $1,500 complete for 2 signs 3 years ago. And the current quotation from the same vendor for 1 sign in a lower grade of materials was almost $1,800. So clearly, I took them that the vendor doesn't want the job, actually. And I just said, well, cut your, figure out how you can cut your costs as much as possible, try to pay for it some other way, and then bring it to us. If you can't, after that, bring it to us as an extraordinary need, and don't sweat. We'll look at it as potentially as an extraordinary thing rather than a setting the level for your budget going forward. So I hope that was the right way to handle that.
That sounds very sensible to me. Thanks.
Thanks, you're welcome.
Anybody else with anything to bring on in that you've heard? I'm gonna connect with Klaus Ullman soon to talk about IT stuff. We just haven't been able to coordinate schedules because I think there's some stuff that they're gonna want to be doing as they get that department up and running, but haven't had a chance to have that conversation yet. All right. Well, so can't, you can take me out of Wellesley, but you can't get the professor out of me. Sorry. So here's like a 3-slide PowerPoint that I'm going to share with just a little bit of budget, background. And I will send this around and share it with everybody. Give me a second here to get screen share set up. And this is a great, can everybody see that? Did it come through? Is it big enough?
Great, thank you.
Big enough? It's all good? Okay. So, the discussion of schools is a great setup because that's a big chunk of increases. So I put just 4 slides together. One was a slide of when I first got on advisory, things that it took me a while to just kind of get the numbers and get it all in my head. The top 3 numbers, I think nobody would be surprised by. The bottom number is just a useful rule of thumb that when people talk about spending, it turns out that about $18,000 of spending is a penny on the tax rate. I think the old rule had been about 15,000, but assessments have gone up, assessed values have gone up. So it's now a penny on the tax rate amounts to about $18,000 of revenue or spending. So if you think about, an item that somebody is proposing and it's, I I always have trouble doing arithmetic in my head. It's $72,000. That would be 4 cents on the tax rate for everybody in town, every business in town, and so on. So just a useful rule of thumb, and you'll hear people use that shorthand when they're trying to kind of gauge how big something is okay, what would this mean? What would this mean on the tax rate? All right, so just rule of thumb that will be useful. This is a picture I think you've all seen. It's just the shares of
And
operating budget.
Dan, sorry, just a quick question there.
Sure.
So that translates essentially for the average household into what, about $18, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that should be right.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. So 18,000. Yeah, I didn't do that bit of math. That would be a good extra bit of math to do. Let's see. Yeah, I think what you said is, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right. All right, so just a reminder of budget shares. I think a lot of you have seen this before. The most important message here is that schools are really big. So if there's a big increase in the school budget, that means the overall budget's going to be going up a bunch. Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, just one note on this as well. There is in the insurance and employee benefits and the debt service, in particular,
Yeah.
those are shared items. So locally, the Pine Hill schools, all the teachers and staff there are covered under the insurance and employee benefits line items. So that 58% of schools does not cover their benefits at Pine Hill,
Yeah.
nor the debt service. So just to put that in context as
Oh,
well.
that's great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
58%
thanks
is the
for,
direct school spending.
yeah, thanks for adding
Indirect
that.
costs as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point that, the chart here is really understating the impact of schools for just the reason that that Jeremy said. Because of the way that, where things land. That what's shown as schools are the operating budgets, but a chunk of other stuff appears, a chunk of other things related to, a chunk of spending related to schools is appearing in some of these other slices too. So anyways, just some big picture numbers, and it shows, I think, the overall budget challenge that people given spending on schools, public works, public safety, debt service, employee benefits, there's not a lot else. That's where all the dollars are. So if, the budget is going to be tight, if this is the year when the budget's going to be tight, it's going to need to be tight in some combination of those areas. It can't be, let's do everything there, and somehow the everything else piece is gonna, make up the slack. The arithmetic just doesn't work. If it's a tight year for budgets, it's going to be tight in some of the larger departments that provide services that people in town really value. Okay, so just that bit of background. All right, so Prop 2.5, you'll see in a minute why I'm bringing this up and wanted to just highlight this. I think some of you who've been through this before would know all this. This will be review, but if you haven't been through this, might be useful background. So Prop 2.5 puts a couple of limits on how much towns can assess in property taxes. One limit that really doesn't matter for us because we're so far away from it is that total property tax collections cannot be more than 2.5% of total property valuation. And I didn't include that in this chart because we're way far away from that. That's not really relevant for us. The other limit is that the automatic increase in the amount of property taxes, what gets called the levy limit, the automatic increase in that is 2.5% a year. So they're actually kind of two different ways or places where the 2.5% shows up. And hence, the Prop 2.5. So here's how that works. Start with last year's levy limit, and this bit is all about growth rates. That one that we said doesn't really matter for us is about the level. This is all about growth rates. How much can what's the limit to how high taxes can go, and it's all characterized in terms of growth rate. So you start with last year's levy limit, which would be the maximum amount that the town could tax. And then you make some adjustments to that moving into the new year. One is the 2.5% automatic increase, hence the name Prop 2.5. So the levy limit automatically every year increases 2.5%. Then there's an adjustment for what's called new growth. And what that means, what that term means is the revenue, the property tax revenue generated by new construction in town or additions that people put on their homes. It does not mean increases in the value of somebody's home, an increase in the assessment on, our house on Lake Street. That doesn't count. That's a revaluation, a reassessment. If we put an addition on the back of the house and added 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, that would count as new growth. Or the developments on Coolidge, that would be new growth. New house pops up on a vacant lot like the one on Farm Road, that's new growth. And what's getting added in here is the implied bump to property tax revenue. So, $1 million home, given property tax rates, that would generate, something in the neighborhood of 17,000, 18,000, add in the 17,000, 18,000, add in the $17,000 or $18,000 of what gets called new growth or increments to property tax, to the allowable limit on property tax revenue. Next category up is overrides. Sherborn hasn't done one of these for many years, but towns can, through a vote at town meeting and at the election, vote to raise this limit. So think of this limit as a line running up in a chart, kind of an upward sloping line, and property tax levy, total property taxes, across all towns has to be below that line. If it's going to go above that line, then it's necessary for the town to do an override to create a parallel shift up in the line and bring the line up high enough so that total property tax levy is less than the limit. The one other adjustment that gets made is this debt exclusion or capital outlay, this upper piece, which is if the town approves a capital item, whether it's a building or a vehicle, and at the town meeting approves it, and then it goes to the election. If it is done as what is called excluded debt, which is typically how the town has financed a capital expenditure, if it's excluded debt, then the debt service payments on that debt get added to this upward sloping tax levy limit. It's temporary, because if it's a 10-year bond, then those debt service payments on that excluded debt get added in for 10 years. And after that debt's paid off, the line comes back down to its prior trend line. So these are the elements that go into setting the maximum or the levy limit, which would be the maximum amount that the town could raise in property taxes without needing to go to the voters for an override. So this was put in place in the 1980s across the state. As I noted in the lower right corner in red, Prop 2.5 is not indexed for inflation. This 2.5% automatic increase, it is just 2.5%. So when inflation in most of the 2000s was running at 2% or less, there weren't any particular pressures here. With the last bunch of years where inflation has been running more rapid and town spending has been rising more rapidly because of that higher inflation, turns out we're now moving closer to this levy limit. So that's kind of big picture how Prop 2.5 works. The last slide actually puts some numbers on all these categories for Sherborn, so we can see sort of where the town is. But before jumping to that, questions on this? Anything I didn't explain well, or Jeremy, any mistakes I made that you wanna help me get this exactly right? Nora, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question, and I know other towns have the CPA, Community Preservation Act. And And Jeremy, I don't know if you mentioned, like, I remember talking to somebody about it, and it seems interesting. I'm not really the one to suggest a new tax, but it just seems interesting. It's, preservation monies are raised locally through the imposition of a surcharge of not more than 3% of the tax levy against real property. It's for historic preservation, affordable housing, and outdoor recreation. Has any thought been, Jeremy or Dan, onto the CPA?
I just say one thing and then Jeremy can jump in and fill in. So I think the town considered that some years ago when it was first an option. And I think then the town said, no, not interested, don't want to add the extra tax. I think there's been more recently some renewed interest in perhaps considering that again. And Jeremy, if you want to jump in on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Dan. So it was a topic of much debate in the past, I've been told. There is some interest and some information, and we've prepared some information for the select board. They've got another assignment for us to see, since there is, so the CPA monies, the town, the town would need to adopt this. They need to, to adopt this at town meeting. And when it did come before town meeting before and did not pass. But there's a portion that's raised locally by way of a fee. It's not technically a tax, but it's related to your assessed value. It's a fee. Those fees go into a specific account. And then there's also revenue from this that's generated at the Registry of Deeds for actually filing of documents. There's fees that get charged, and that goes into a state pool that then is distributed out to all the CPA communities. So there's actually sort of a cost match or a grant match that you could receive for CPA monies. That's varied year to year based on how much money was available in that statewide pot and how many communities adopted CPA. But it's been running around 30% as a match. So there is an incentive for communities to seek that match by being a CPA community. But those are the two sources of revenue. But there's not currently any proposal to bring this forward to town meeting this spring. But the select board would like to see an analysis of what capital projects the town has spent previously and what may be in the capital plan going forward that could be funded via the CPA as an alternate funding source. Generally, that's preservation of properties, it's open space, it's recreational, athletic fields, that sort of thing. The fit out of the historic society, that could be CPA, things like that. There's a whole matrix of what that could be expended, but not just any capital. You can't buy a truck.
Thank you. Sorry, Sean.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but while I was thinking of it, was when you're looking for income generation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else on this before we look at a few numbers? Okay, so here's some numbers, and here I've done the thing you're never supposed to do on a slide, which is I put too much stuff on the slide. So let me walk you through what I've done here. So fiscal years 23, 24, 25. Note the highlight at the top, illustrative for FY25. These are my estimates, plausible numbers, a million things that we still don't know about how the FY25 budget's going to come together. Plenty of uncertainty on the revenue side, plenty of uncertainty on the spending side. I came up in a spreadsheet with some plausible numbers. So this is just meant to be order of magnitude. It's not meant to be a super precise forecast, but I think it conveys a valuable lesson for us, or has a valuable message for us. So first, just matching this back with the picture, we were just looking for Prop 2.5. So here are the different colored bars stacked up in each year. So the blue bars are the prior year's levy limit. So fiscal year 23, just about 28 million levy limit. And you can see the blue bar for 24 is just right in line with that. And then similarly for 25, here's the levy limit. I'm not including the excluded debt because that's this temporary add-on. So I'm just focusing on the, some of the blue, orange, and gray bars to get to the levy limit. And you can see how, each blue bar matches the sum of the bars from the prior period, where the orangish bar is the automatic 2.5% growth converted into dollar terms. And the gray bar, the skinny little gray bar, is new growth, or that new construction, new either additions on home, new structures in town. So you take the prior year levy, add in the 2.5%, add in the new growth, and that gets you to the levy limit, not counting the excluded debt piece. And then, of course, for the next year, the blue bar exactly picks up that levy limit. Add in the orange part, the automatic 2.5%, add in the gray bar, the new growth, and then you get to the new levy limit before we add in the excluded debt piece. And same thing going into 25. The reason that I'm setting aside the excluded debt piece is the 2.5% automatic growth doesn't apply to the excluded debt piece. That's just a temporary thing for the duration of the bond financing, whatever those capital items are. So then we add in the debt exclusion, and the numbers here are the dollar values in millions. So 27.1 million, 28 million, 28.9 million. The debt service then that the town is paying that's in this category of being excluded debt was a little over 2 million in fiscal 23. So that would say the maximum amount in fiscal 23 that the town could collect in property taxes would have been this 30 million. In 2024, that the debt service on that excluded debt was 2.2 million. So that would get us up to here. And then in 25, there's likely to be a decent bump up in the excluded debt limit. I have it jumping by 300,000. And the reason for that is that for a number of years, the town has, when it has borrowed short term in what's called a BAN, or a bond anticipation note. And that's just short-term debt. The town's just paying interest only on it. And then every 2 or 3 years, that gets converted into a long-term bond. So this summer, that's expected to be converted into a long-term bond. And when it's converted into a long-term bond, the principal and interest payments on that bond, because it was all excluded debt, goes into this dotted region of debt service on excluded debt. So the jump between fiscal 24 and 25 is because of this bond anticipation note that's going to get rolled over into a long-term bond. And that includes some borrowing for the library and all the other capital projects in the last couple of years that get us to that. So then the black bar here is the actual property tax levy, the total amount in millions of dollars that the town has collected in property taxes. And here's kind of the main message of the chart. You can see in fiscal 23, the value of the black line was well below the sum of all of the bars, including the dotted piece. So we were quite far away from the binding 2.5 limit. Then we get into this period, and remember, these are fiscal years, not calendar years. Then we get into fiscal 24, getting into this period of higher inflation. The gap between the black line and the top of the sum of the bars is getting smaller because we had a pretty big budget increases in fiscal 24, reflecting higher energy prices, the COLA, increases in health insurance costs, all the other things that came that affected the budget, that went up well over 2.5%. So some of that gap that gets called excess levy capacity closed, narrowed. And then in fiscal 25, again, when Jeremy presents numbers in January and actually has the rolled up budget, we'll have more precise estimates of this. This could easily move around. Don't take these as a really serious forecast. They're just meant to be plausible estimates. But what I did is I said school increase, the 8% for Pine Hill, the 6% for the region, average those together, they come to about a 6.9% increase for schools. And I said, let's suppose everything else other than schools goes up 3.5%. Given an estimate of how much revenue the town will get from sources other than property taxes, what would that imply for the property tax levy? Where would we be And the message is that we're getting much, much closer to Prop 2.5 limits. And I don't think anyone is looking or looking for doing an override. And this is a particular sense in which the school budget, the big increases there, just as Paul and Mike suggested, kind of constrained things because we are moving in this higher inflation period with bigger wage increases, energy prices, everything else, other materials that have been going up in cost. We're moving closer to the Prop 2.5 limits, the maximum levy limit. And again, Prop 2.5 is not indexed for inflation. We are not the only town facing this. Jeremy probably knows more about this than I do, but from a casual look around, plenty of other towns are facing the same issues. Some have chosen to do overrides. Some have made other kinds of adjustments. But we're in a world of higher inflation, more pressures on the budget, but a max levy limit that isn't adjusting to reflect that in any way. So this is the sense in which, the specific sense again, in which I think the large requested increases in the proposed school budget, kind of put a bit of a squeeze on everything else. Okay, so that is everything I had. I just wanted to put that out there. I will send these slides around so everybody has a copy. Happy to get any questions, any pushback if somebody's got a different perspective on this, but I thought this would be valuable to just kind of get out there before we get to January and digging into specific budgets and specific numbers.
Dan, if I was a student, maybe I can't say this in class, but since, here we're in advisory committee, this is outstanding, kind of visualization of this. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks.
Actually, if I was a student, I'd still say that, Dan. This is an outstanding representation, right?
And then all your peers in class say, oh, you're just trying to curry favor with the prof, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's exactly,
whatever.
Okay, make sure you give me a good grade for participation.
Yeah, absolutely. 10% of the grade, you got it. Anything else anybody wanted to ask specifically about this? Again, I'll send these around. Any other just general comments on the kind of budget situation and where we are that would be things for us to talk about before we get to January and digging into specific, hearing from Jeremy on kind of the whole budget package and digging into specifics?
Well, can I ask a question about the grade new growth? Have we heard anything more about the new growth perhaps on Coolidge, Jeremy or Dan?
So I'll just offer the quick comment that that has the potential for considerable new growth, but it's not a done deal yet. We're hoping it happens, but there's still, Toll Brothers could still decide they don't want to do the project. And if they do the project, it's gonna be a while.
Right,
it's
of course.
build out's it's not gonna be fiscal 25 or probably even fiscal 26.
For 27, yeah, I got it.
Yeah, exactly. Jeremy, please add to that.
Yeah, that's correct, Dan. And I think the numbers you have here, are essentially not including that, because it
Correct.
wouldn't be reflected in 25 anyway, but it would be 26, 27 if it does come to fruition. So we'll know more over the course of the next 6 months, how that project goes. Toll Brothers is committed, and they've passed their due diligence stage. So they're proceeding with some more detailed designs and pursuing permits. So they're still well involved and appear to really want to do the project, but there's still a ways to go.
Yeah, thanks. Penn, you had mentioned you might have wanted to get in with a couple comments.
Yeah, I did, if this is a good time for it.
Sure.
Okay, do we still need your screen?
No, let me get rid of that. If everybody's good, give me a second here. Right. Okay.
All right, thanks, Dan, for remembering that. Just a couple of, since I'm new to advisory and I've been thinking about advisory and our role and my role, And there are two things I was wanted to bring to it, sort of a perspective kind of thing. One is, so I've lived in Sherborn since 1990, for what that's worth. And people in Sherborn have always complained about their taxes. You know, my joke about it is there are two kinds of people in Sherborn: people who complain about their taxes and people I haven't met. Um, but I would say in the last few years, the tenor has changed. People are not so much complaining, but they're kind of more vocally unhappy, for what that's worth. I just sort of laying that out. The other thing is a matter of, I think, perspective as well. I think there's, and I'm voicing my own opinion here, but there's a sense, it's a newish sense. You see it in the way other people in other towns look at Sherborn, the way some residents in Sherborn look at Sherborn, the way I think people who work for the town look at Sherborn. And I think the perception is that Sherborn is a rich town. And the way I look at it is Sherborn's a poor town with a lot of rich people living in it. And there's a big difference. Natick is a rich town. Framingham is a rich town. Wellesley is a rich town because they have revenue sources, significant revenue sources beyond residential real estate taxes. And I think I sort of look at my role in this, and perhaps advise some thoughts for the rest of the advisory, is to sort of put that cap on and say, all right, what, do we need the latest and the greatest? If we're buying a vehicle, do we need to buy one with every bell and whistle, or should we be looking at strippers, base models? That sort of mindset is, I think at the very least, it's worth giving some thought to, because I think I get a sense of, from what I can, as I said, I think there's a certain perception about Sherborn being a wealthy town that I think, as in terms of it being an entity that is spending money as opposed to the home of people with money. I don't think we're a rich town. I think we're a poor town, and I think we should. I mean, that's how I'm sort of tailoring my approach to things.
All right, thanks, Penn. Appreciate that. Paul, you had your hand up before.
Yes. Yes. One kind of observation, maybe a question as well. So I know we're looking at fiscal year 25. However, it seems to me that there's a context about future years, like next year. For example, it's probably likely that inflation is going to come down. So maybe like next year, the things that drove a higher inflation in 25 might be lower-ish. So in the context, I think could be that perhaps fiscal year 25 might be a tight year, hence our guidance about flat growth, and that looking ahead, maybe 26 might be lower inflation and might be a year where perhaps a higher growth percentage might be okay. And then the thinking could be that for important things that different groups have in the budget, the school committee and kind of others, maybe the thinking that if things could be pushed into 26, then that might be beneficial for them, and not that they'll never get it, but that next year just might be less tight. Fiscal year 26 might be less tight than fiscal year 25. And I wonder if that could be an overall theme that might make things more palatable for the budget owners as they're thinking about what things to use to sort of trim down 25, but know that perhaps we could be thinking that in 26, those might be more palatable. So I'm just curious if that line of thinking holds any water.
Yeah, so here's where I think it gets more complicated than what you just described. So think about that, that max levy limit line, that's trending up at 2.5% year with some adjustments for new growth, and then the temporary bumps for the debt exclusion. So on the numbers that I presented, we're just about there. I think probably we won't be there. We'll be a little bit below, at least on the numbers that I put together. So we're just a little bit below. But that line, the slope of that line is only going up basically 2.5% a year, plus just a little bit more for new growth until maybe Coolidge happens. So even if next year, let's think about fiscal 26, the schools are still going to have a big number because they have the same contract and they're going to have big wage increases in fiscal 26. So the schools, maybe not as big because maybe some of the other things will be a little less, but schools are still going to come in with a big number. And even if inflation's down, if say the town budget, instead of going up 6 or 7%, goes up 3%, well, we're already still just below that limit. So it'd take a very small bump up from the schools, to push us above it, because it's not like, we get a break because, we're kind of there, and we would need things to grow more slowly than the line is rising to rebuild space in between. Or if Coolidge happens and we get a bunch of new growth, then the line jumps up for that, and then we suddenly have space again.
Right.
So
The challenge is being close to the line then, I guess, right?
yeah, so to my mind, the thing that's gonna maybe ease those pressures is new growth, which would then ease those pressures and create some space. Because it's, once you're close to the line, you got to grow more slowly than the line to build distance back in. So that's the way that I've been thinking about it. I didn't show it. I have run those numbers out like 5 years, but I didn't show it because, forecast of Sherborn's budget and fiscal 2028, it's that's pretty far out there. Nora, go ahead.
So, thank you. At what point, since we can't print money, does it ever get that we can get ahead of the curve here? Does that, when we'll have money as opposed to keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing? When does that end?
So let's see. So two reactions to that. One is, in terms of space between the levy and the max levy limit, that's going to be about new growth. In terms of the debt piece, that's kind of touching, I think, on to my mind, the same point that Penn raised. The borrowing is for capital items. It's been for buildings, roads, vehicles, emergency equipment, and so on. And then I think the question becomes, how much of that does the town choose to spend? And, as Penn suggested, at what level does the town choose to do that? To my mind, borrowing for capital items is pretty sensible in the sense of, hey, here's a piece of equipment, emergency equipment for the fire department that's going to last 10 years. If it's something the town decides it needs, borrowing for it means that, that then it's getting paid for over the next 10 years. And rather than, it's all paid for this year, and then if somebody moves out of town, well, they paid for a fire truck that they moved out of town and aren't benefiting from. So, the logic of borrowing is, it spreads the cost, over the duration or the life of the item that was purchased. The challenge, of course, especially in this environment, is with interest rates, borrowing gets expensive, and it's a little less appealing to borrow and pay all of the interest that comes due on that. Should have hooked up with my past employer because they could print money, but it doesn't work here.
I know, drats.
Or did
It'd be interesting to see the pulse on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. I believe that just got passed in Wellesley. I was at a conference, and it's basically, I know we have septic and well, but we have larger lots. And I know California passed it that people can have, it's another source of income for people in their homes to, help subsidize this tax burden.
It's interesting you mentioned that. That very same topic came up at our dinner table conversation tonight.
Oh, interesting. I was not there. Yeah, so I was, obviously that would have to lighten up some, I think, anyway, I'm just kind of thinking out of the box here between CPA and ADUs and all those 3-letter things. It's interesting. to get the pulse on that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting. I mean, that seems like something that the select board has talked about in the past. Might be an interesting thing for them to consider again. I mean, it's right in, it's an option in town in a very limited way, but it could be, done in a more expansive way.
Okay, thank you.
Nor did I sort of say something that was helpful?
And in regards to that, it's just at some point, if the school budget keeps going, it just,
Yeah. I mean, it comes back to Penn's point, right?
mhm.
Anybody else with general comments about where we are? I mean, well, again, we're going to get into the specifics in January.
So just a quick question on accessory dwelling units. Wasn't there an article that was passed, I want to say 3 years ago or something like that, about those? I don't think it allowed everyone to just build accessory dwelling units, but I believe what it did is allow people to rent, I think, or maybe my memory is failing me a little bit. This was probably more than 3 years. This was probably 4 years ago or so.
I remember that too, and I can't remember the specifics except that I recall it was relatively limited in what it allowed. It did allow some, but I think it was relatively limited. But I
Probably,
also, it was
yeah,
long enough
probably the
ago that
people who
I also,
already had some like
yeah, it was
dwellings.
something like that. Yeah, something
Right,
like
I think I remember having a conversation with a neighbor of ours who was, I think, on one of the town committees about this. And I mentioned that we were looking at building a barn, and he said, well, if you do that, make sure you either build in the capacity to put in an accessory apartment, because you can do that. But I remember, so he made it sound like you could do that to a new structure. The limitation that he mentioned is, I believe it's either 1,100 or 900 square feet interior. Again, please don't quote me on this, but my understanding is the limitation was a size limitation. And that sort of puts a damper, not a damper, but that's one of the caps on it.
Anybody else on big picture budget stuff?
May I just make 2 comments as well?
Of course, of course.
So one comment is, I heard a couple of times the mention of until Coolidge comes online, and maybe the cautionary side of me says, yes, that will bring us new growth, but a few years later will bring the expenses significantly more. So that's not a permanent way to make that excess levy capacity bigger, right? It's not. It's just a temporary relief, like you take a breath, but you're going back underwater. So that's one, and the other one, I do, and I know Peter Galatano used to say this a lot, that and the point that you mentioned, Dan, that borrowing is sensible for capital items because you end up paying for it over the duration of the use of the item. However, I still don't like borrowing, right? Because what you're doing essentially is you're charging future residents the compound interest, right? The effect of the compound interest of your borrowing is charged to future residents, right? So you use the item, but the effects of the compounding of the interest is actually being borne by future resident. And we keep on doing that and doing that and doing that. And that to me is just, I cringe. Right. So
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, and it matters a lot more now in a higher interest rate environment. I mean, I think the way the town has done this many times in the past is for smaller capital items like buying a police cruiser. right? That's typically been financed from free cash or some other source. And so the borrowing has tended to be reserved for larger items, like the $1 million for new HVAC, air handling units on the roof of the school. And the borrowing's typically been for that, where the operating budget or free cash just couldn't or forget about what I said about the operating budget, but where free cash just, couldn't finance that. And there wouldn't really be any alternative other than borrowing. All right. So thank you for doing that. I just thought it would be helpful for all of us to have a bit of that conversation now and not need to do that. Once we're ready to dig into actual budgets. So what about jumping onto the next item? How do people feel about the Zoom meeting versus sort of a hybrid where, we would all try to be in person at least when we could, and, people could call in. I've been very happy on Zoom. I lived on Zoom teaching for a long time. On the other hand, I think we missed the opportunity for some of the informal Jeremy just shared something in the chat. Let me just take a quick look. Oh, I think he's just shared the piece on accessory dwelling units. Jeremy, why don't you just jump in with that, and then I'll come back to the meeting format.
Sure. So that's a link to the zoning bylaws. Section 3.2 is the schedule of use regulations. And it allows for apartments, accessory apartments. And as Penn mentioned, there's a size limit and some other things. But if you look at section 3.2, it gives the detail.
All right, thanks. That's
allowed
great.
in all it's allowed in all districts, but there's limitation.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. That's great. So I was just going to say that, of course, the in-person meetings, there's the opportunity for some informal conversation before and after meetings. Zoom meetings are very convenient, certainly, but it's not the same as seeing people in person. So I was just interested in people's thoughts, preferences. We're at a stage where we could be doing some in-person hybrid stuff. We could also stick with Zoom. Pen.
In general, and for this, I prefer, I'm a live meeting when possible kind of guy. So that would be, my vote would be for the hybrid meetings when possible.
What are other people's feelings on that? I mean,
my vote would be to pick one, either in person or virtual. I think the hybrid, everyone will just default to being virtual then, but.
So I mean, we could, if we went the in-person route, we could amongst ourselves all agree that we're going to be in person. I think the big advantage of the hybrid, using that technology is there's likely to be more citizen participation, because if somebody just wants to zoom in and hear one bit, they can do that. So my sense is other boards, when they've done in-person meetings, they've often had a hybrid option, not necessarily so much for board or committee members, but so that if somebody wants to just zoom in to kind of half listen because there's one thing they're interested in, they can do that. Mike, do you have a preference for, when you said pick one, which would you pick?
My preference, is largely selfish. To stay on Zoom. It's helpful. Just with the balance of schedules and life. But it's not a hard preference, but
it definitely has advantages. It's easier for me to just walk up here than to come on to town hall. Mike F, did you have a
I'm fine either way. Yeah, I'm indifferent.
Yeah. Okay. Wasim, Nora, Paul.
I just think of going into the winter on cold nights in January, going live is just a little, I do love live and being in person, but I think the reality is twofold. A, for us all to make it here, so weather, and all that, and ice and that stuff. And then the other piece is I think it's good to have transparency and to have these meetings recorded so people can, you're right, like participate. I think you'll have more participation. People can join in and it's easier
I
for
think,
citizens.
I think if we go the hybrid route, I think meetings could still be recorded. So I think the technology in town hall is good enough that we could still manage that. I will say, having watched recordings of hybrid meetings, the recording is a bit more scattered than what it is for a regular Zoom meeting. But there'd be the audio and some video that would be a little jumpy, but it would, I think, kind of work. One thing that so there's a woodworking group that I'm involved in, and they've gone the route of, I think, like in January, February, and March, or maybe it was December, January, and February, doing Zoom meetings, and then other months doing hybrid when the weather is a little less of an issue, and maybe people are less likely to have holiday related stuff going on. Paul, Wasim, thoughts one way or another?
Yeah, I think for me, right, seeing people in person, I think would definitely be a benefit. But I like the idea of keeping a hybrid, and then maybe, as you just mentioned, Dan, maybe wait until the weather is more conducive to that. Right, like being new to advisory, being able to have more interaction with folks before and after would be beneficial to me. But maybe kind of waiting until there's a more convenient time for folks would make sense to me.
Wasim?
So I was going to say Zoom, but Paul, you made a very good point, and I hate that I have to follow that. So you know what? Maybe we'll do like one potluck and we all go there in person. My preference is Zoom, to be honest, but
Okay.
I agree. There's definitely value to have. But maybe we can designate, even if we go the Zoom route, we can at least designate a couple of meetings where they're okay. Let's do a meet and greet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like preferences are a little mixed. I mean, maybe a thing to do would be for the next, I don't know, the January and early February, stick on Zoom and then start doing mixing in some hybrid in-person meetings with, some technology if somebody is either traveling um, or if citizens want to dial in. I think we do need to be mindful of what Mike F said, which is if we all grant ourselves the Zoom option, with I'll come in, but I can do Zoom if we could easily all just revert back to Zoom, and then we should just stay on Zoom because the hybrid thing makes interacting with people who are in person and on Zoom a little more complicated. So I don't know. So I think given what I've heard, I think my thought would be what I just said. Let's stick with Zoom for at least for January, and then see if we can mix in some in-person meetings and maybe get the benefit of some of that interaction. And one big decision we'll have to make is when we do the public hearing in March, is whether we want that to be, don't have to decide that tonight, but whether we want that to be Zoom or in person. And that's the start at about 8 a.m. and probably end around 5 p.m. meeting. Where again, some advantages to doing that in person and the benefit of body language and interacting with people in an in-person setting. The disadvantages for an all-day meeting, I don't know, Zoom's kind of nice because you can turn your camera off and pop away to take a bathroom break or get some food or whatever. So we'll have to make that decision, but we don't have to make that decision tonight. Okay. Does that all sound reasonable to everybody to stick with Zoom for the next whatever first set of meetings in January and then start mixing in some? Then we can at least do a test run, try an in-person meeting and see how it goes. Okay, all right, so we'll do that. All right, so minutes. Let's do the easy one first. Give me 1 second to do a quick screen share. Okay, so these are minutes from the November 1 meeting. I'll just scroll through this. I'll just scroll through these, just jump in, stop with any suggestions, corrections, adjustments.
So Dan, this is not necessarily a suggestion on this meeting note itself, but there, since I saw the minute taking duties, and I was wondering if you've given a thought to aligning the minute taking a little bit with whoever is actually responsible for those budgets. I know this is off topic, so we can take this offline, but since it was mentioned here, I remembered it.
Oh, yeah, okay. So so I did that with our joint meeting with the school committees. Um I'll take another look at that. It's going to be a little trickier than last year because we've trying this a different way since Jeremy's going to be presenting a whole budget package. We've set aside fewer meetings to review the budget. So I think the thought is we're going to be a little more big picture. So there are more budgets in each meeting, and I'm not sure that it'll, there with the mix of budgets, there may not be a way to line that up. But
Got it, got it.
I'll take a look at that and see if any trades might be beneficial that way.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thanks. All right. Anybody see anything that we should switch? And thanks to Nora for putting these together. If not, I'd happily take a motion to approve the minutes as shown on screen.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All right. Quick roll call. Mike F.
Aye. Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Ken.
Aye.
Wasim.
Aye.
Nora.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. Okay, so 7-0 for those. Great. Let me get rid of that. And then here's the next one coming up in just a second. Okay, so these are the public hearing minutes. We kept not doing these because they were long and involved. They're long enough that I can scroll through if that would be helpful. I was thinking more if people had had a chance to look at these. If anybody had suggestions, corrections, adjustments, just toss them out and we can jump to the page. And maybe not take the time to scroll through the 10 pages. Did anybody see anything? I'm happy to scroll through if anybody would like me to. Steph Harrison, who did these minutes, I thought did a really great job. I went through them very carefully. Steph and I went back and forth on a few corrections. So since I wasn't sure everybody else was going to super carefully read all 10 pages, I did that. But if anybody else saw anything that ought to change, we can do that. Everybody good with these, more or less?
Yeah, they
All
look
right.
fine.
Okay, great. Motion to approve as shown on screen.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Roll call. Nora.
Aye.
Thanks. Wasim.
Aye.
Pen.
Aye.
Mike W.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
And Mike F.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. So 7-0 for those. Okay, thanks. That's great. I think for anybody who looked on the new webpage, I think we had been missing a bunch of minutes. I think we're just about up to date now with all of our minutes being posted. Okay, so that is it for everything I had. Our next meeting is set for January 10th, Wednesday. We'll do that one on Zoom. That's when we'll hear from Jeremy and kind of get the overview of the budget and then dive into some of the particular departments. Anything anybody else wanted to slip in before we wrap up? Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
I was looking for a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was
Okay.
asking for one rather than
I make
making.
a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you, Nora.
Second,
All right, quick roll call. Mike F,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Mike W,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
Wasim,
aye.
Nora,
Aye.
and I'm I as well. So 7-0, and we're adjourned at 8:28. Great.
Okay. Have a
Thanks,
good night.
everybody. See you on January 10th. Hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Have a
great
wonderful holiday break, and we'll all come back energized and ready to go in January. All right.
Very good.
See you.
Good,
Bye.
everyone.
Take care. Happy holidays.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.